I'm not sure that's quite okay. And again, it's not my personal intent. It's just a matter to talk with council and see. It's one of those where if it doesn't feel quite right, like Trustee Hayes said, that having 4 out of 6 trustees in a meeting noticed or anything else, and not that anybody was doing anything wrong, it just didn't look right. We need to be aware that if we're doing something that doesn't look right, that in and of itself is not a good thing either. So, Henry?
Do you think that the consultants find having trustees there a good thing, or is it kind of inhibited by having trustees there, or is it beneficial for them? I mean, that, after all, is the purpose of the meeting, is for the consultants and staff. And if the staff and the consultants feel that the addition of trustees makes things more complicated, then that's another way of looking at it. Purpose isn't for the trustees to be there, the purpose is for staff and consultants to be there.
Well, 2 things on that. One, I can always meet with them anytime as far as that, if I thought that they were really being inhibited. But second, no one has said anything to me, but my own personal belief from my own experiences is when you have more bosses there, most people are slightly more uncomfortable worrying about a lot of bosses listening to you, you're doing wrong. Just a lot of people to be answering to. Cheryl?
Are consultants still meeting prior to board meetings? At a dinner meeting?
Yes, the consultants do. We discussed tonight a number of zoning issues. We discussed this particular topic and the various elements of it. We discussed the various things that are going to be coming up on Thursday with administrative hearing.
And that's consultants only, correct?
Yes, occasionally other trustees may come. But again, it's not a question of whether I could meet with the trusts or with the consultants. As I said, I've got the time, I'm going to be here. Well, Rob gets stuck because he's a salaried guy, as is the chief, but Pat's happy enough, he gets paid by the hour. Although he has more than enough work to do in Bruce. So again, I'm being slightly facetious because we're all being serious, I don't want to be too heavy. Yes, I think that they're not inhibited to a point where I think it's a problem, to answer the question more directly. Cheryl, was there anything?
I just would also note that the Personnel Committee has discussed the possibility of having staff meetings as well, or consultant and staff, or whatever, other derivations.
And you know, I've always encouraged everybody, and lately Eric has been taking advantage of meeting with Pat, talking about stormwater and things, that we will make staff and consultants available to any board member at a mutually available time to be able to talk about things. So that's there as well. So I'm not going to make a decision at this point. I would appreciate if any of you have any suggestions as to how we might be able to work this through and how you think all the pieces could fit. Please provide them. And as, again, Trustee Chamberlain said, this really is in my lap because I can take it back. It's purely my prerogative. But I do hate to cut off the communication. I'd much prefer to find a way that everybody can get the benefit of these kind of meetings. I suppose we could all go to Mike and Eric's house or something, but I know that their wives would appreciate that too much. Any significant comments then? If not, visitors wishing to address the board, we seem to have lasted our high school students. Actually, this was one of our more interesting discussions from my point of view. So the 3 regulars here are not raising their hands, so approval of bills. Do I have a motion to approve bills?
Second.
Questions, discussion? Cheryl, do I see one turn sideways with you over there?
How did you know?
I know where the sideways goes usually rest.
One, the Davy bill, it looks like it was for a police call on a hazardous tree, but it was a private
address, so I just want to make sure we follow.
Okay, is that the one on Chicory?
Chicory.
Okay. That is A, we would pay it. B, we talked to the individual. C, they said it belonged to the homeowners association. D, Pat then said, oh no, we actually own that property. It's somehow deeded to us. F, Brian called and said, yes, but it really, the homeowners association agreed to take care of it, so send us the bill, but why don't you deed us the property? So it doesn't really constitute that simple a bill, but yes, we are looking to see if we get reimbursed.
Okay, I'll leave it turned in for discussion.
Okay, Eric?
Just a bill that I don't recognize, Central Square Technologies.
I think, I will want to double check, but I believe that's a new name for the, one of the, oh, wait a minute. Put it sideways. I'm getting several different ideas. We've got a couple of different vendors in relation to the water department with the updating of the software for reading the meters to talk to the other program, etc. So don't let me give you false information. I'll just double check and make sure it's good. I'm pretty sure it is. Any other questions? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. May I have a roll call for approval of bills?
Trustee Chamberlain?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein?
Aye.
Trustee Haber? Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson?
All right, bills are approved. All right, thank you. Moving on then to new business. This is a little irregular because we have two ordinances together. Let me turn it over to council. This is what's necessary in order to be able to move forward on the leasing of the space on the cell tower.
Okay. I'd like the board to take up consideration of the agenda item that's marked A1 first. Consideration of an ordinance establishing procedures for the sale of real property. This is regarding the purchase and sale agreement with Landmark Dividend, but it goes beyond that. Just briefly, I can explain there's a memo in the file in the packet. The agreement with Landmark Dividend is a sale of interest that the village has in their leases with AT&T and T-Mobile. As a real estate, as a lawyer who does a lot of real estate work, I would describe those interests being sold as interest in real estate or real estate interest. The agreement is also very akin to a financing agreement because while Landmark is receiving the assignment of leases, many responsibilities or rights to enforce the leases remain with the village. So it also kind of walks and talks like a kind of a financing transaction. I worried a little bit about how to properly authorize our entering into the agreement with Landmark Dividend. That's the second ordinance under the A category is the ordinance approving the agreement with Landmark Dividend. And I took a look at the municipal code provisions that deal with the sale of real estate. You're probably familiar in a number of situations where we authorize the sale of surplus property, that's personal property. We can authorize it by an ordinance with a negotiated sale, and we authorize the chief to negotiate the best deal we can when we auction an automobile or something like that. For non-home rule communities, the state law is more restrictive and requires either an appraisal process or a process where you solicit bids and go through publication and 2 or 3 weeks in a row in the paper. Many home rule communities take advantage of their home rule status to amend that set of provisions to provide and provide an alternate method of authorizing the sale of real property. So the ordinance before you, which I think should be adopted so that we can then proceed to authorize the agreement with Landmark. This provides a very truncated set of provisions for the board to authorize the sale of real property. Basically says we can go through a bid process or a negotiated sale process. In some communities I looked at, even if you go through a negotiated sale process as a transparency measure, before you can enter into the agreement, they might provide that you have to publish in a paper that you intend to enter into the agreement. we don't really have that pressing need here, but I thought maybe another way of doing it, rather than publishing it in the paper where no one sees it, is to say that we shouldn't authorize a negotiated sale unless it has previously appeared as a possibility on the agenda of the board at a regular meeting at least 30 days before we take the action. In this case, the proposed sale of Landmark Dividend has appeared on our agendas at least 3 times, and I made a note of that in the other ordinance. So the purpose of this ordinance is to, this ordinance establishing procedures for the sale of real estate would not be limited to the situation of Landmark Dividend. We could use it, for example, to have a negotiated sale for one of the parcels on Chianti. We could use it for the sale of easements. There are any number of possibilities. This is basically a generic methodology for us to use as a home rule village when we want to sell real estate rather than relying on the provisions of the municipal code. The next ordinance, and I'll just sort of speak on them at the same time and you can decide how best to discuss them, is the ordinance actually approving the agreement with Landmark Dividend. This is a purchase and sell agreement, an assignment of lease interest. I want to thank Trustee Haber for taking as much time as he did to read it carefully with me and to offer a lot of constructive comments. It's a difficult agreement because it's a very nuanced set of transfers of rights. Certain rights are being transferred to the village, other rights are not. In the memo, which I've now lost someplace here. Thank you. I touched my very sensitive screen here and I've lost. That's okay. I'll probably lose this microphone in a minute.
That's why I was doing paper.
I want to go to the next. Oh, there, no. I have a fallback. I have a default. Yes, I know the next one. So going. I just want to describe a little bit again what the agreement with Landmark Dividend. The ordinance should be coming after this. It's entitled An Ordinance Authorizing the Sale of Certain Property in the Village of Riverwoods to Landmark Infrastructure Holding Company, LLC. Assuming that we have adopted the first ordinance that establishes procedures for selling real estate, this ordinance then is a specific authorization to sell the interest to Landmark Dividend that they have agreed to pay us $1,330,000 for. And in the memo, I tried to describe some of the provisions we've put in there. The last set of changes that we suggested were accepted by Landmark's council. So that's how the two ordinances tie together. The board should first take up, my suggestion is the ordinance authorizing procedures for the sale of real property in the village.
So I noticed on the A1 ordinance, which I'm seeing for the first time, which seems fairly simplistic, there's a provision when the sale is by negotiation that the ordinance ultimately approving the sale has to be adopted by 3/4 vote of the corporate authorities then holding office, which would be different than 3/4, would be different than the majority of a quorum. I don't know if that's intentional, but if it is, it's interesting. I think we should all talk about that, as opposed to just kind of just going over it.
It is intentional, and it doesn't have to be 3/4 as a home rule community. For example, in Evanston, it's 2/3, but the 2/3 is of a larger number. The state law for non-home rule communities uses this language. So I felt that if we were departing from a lot of the strictures in terms of publication and appraisal, but approving the sale of interest as a default position, I'm glad you mentioned this. I thought it would be, at least as a starting point, simpler to simply keep the same approval level that's required now as for this procedure. But it's not mandatory by the board.
I don't have an objection to it. I just think that we all should be aware of it, because it could create problems. didn't want a sale to go through. If 2 members of the board just didn't show up at a meeting, couldn't do it without a unanimity of the remaining 4. I don't know, I can see there could be some manipulating circumstances could come out. So I just throw that out there for everyone to think about before we just.
More than that, like, you need 5 people voting affirmatively. I just did the math. 4 more gone.
Well, it's 2/3 of 7, it's corporate.
Oh, this is 3/4, so it's the mayor.
Mayor.
3/4.
5.1.
We'll say it's 6, because you need.
So is that,
See, that worse than.
that could be an issue.
I might have I don't know if I did mention this in the memo, did I? Yeah, I did. I said that the method of disposition, if you weren't a home rule community, it would be this level of voting, and of course they do that to prevent, village public bodies divesting themselves of assets without careful consideration. It's one thing to sign a contract to purchase, a copier, it's one thing, but when you actually are selling property owned by the village, the standard historically has been greater than a simple majority for non-home rule communities. And even, as the example I mentioned, Evanston, while they have adopted a home rule provision for selling and disposing of real property, they require 2/3 vote, not a simple majority.
Would that apply to purchasing property as well?
No, there's
So
different.
you can purchase it with fewer board members approving it, but you can only sell it when you have more. It seems to me that if the village, using public tax dollars, wants to buy property, that it should be at the same standard as selling it. I don't in any way object to the 3/4. I think it's a good idea, but I would apply it to both ends of the spectrum of purchasing as well as sale.
I'm just going to look up, there are various ways of purchasing, and for non-home rule communities, there's purchasing an installment basis, and they all have different kinds of voting requirements off the top of my head.
That's why you have big bucks.
I know Jeff Siegel.
Is it 4.5 or is it 5? If it's,
Out of 7 board members.
there's 7 or there's 6?
Seven.
It says corporate authorities, it's 6 board members and the mayor.
And
There's
so
a year
7.
counts in that.
Yeah, so it's 5.1. Yeah,
That's
7.
5.25.
Yes, corporate authorities means,
Okay.
for this purpose means the trustees.
In other words, it's 6.
Yes.
So it's got to be unanimous.
So one board member would have.
So
So if
it,
one board member just decides not to appear at board meetings, you
Right.
can't do it.
right, well, and it seems to me that the 3/4 rule makes far more sense when you have a much larger board. But considering how small we are, if only one
The
person,
mayor's allowed to vote in that case because the mayor is.
Can't do it though.
right, but if it's more than 5,
Oh, then it would be 3/4. So then it would be,
So
That's
what
what
would you need 5.2 board, so you have 6.
But it's also where would it be a maybe vote, it's the same as a no in there. But you have to have.
So I like I actually like the 2/3 concept
It
better.
could be 2/3.
It's still 5.
It's still 5, it's 2/3.
If it's 2/3 of all the board authorities, so you're still looking at a large number. Mike?
Just a question, does this pertain to all real property when they're small? So if we wanted to sell a copy of it, we own.
It's not a real
No, real property, not personal property.
Land.
That's what that structure is affixed there too.
For personal property, we already have a ability to.
Can we just make it for outside, or real number instead of percentage?
Your board may change, I guess.
At the board?
I would.
You don't like that?
You want to do 4 out of 7, not a majority and not 2/3?
You can do simple majority. A quorum.
Yeah, I think as Henry said, we can buy it with a simple majority of a quorum.
Well,
I'm a little less worried about selling in some ways than obligating to buy.
I mean, look, I personally like more people ascending.
Me too.
Well, let me suggest this, we need this ordinance tonight for landmark dividend. But doesn't require public hearing or anything else to modify. We can adopt it and modify it later. We just, I need something, so we can do two thirds tonight, and then come back and change it before anything else.
So I don't have a problem with that so long as we come back and consider it right away when we don't have another sale before us.
Sunset provision.
Let's put a sunset provision on this ordinance,
That's
so that
fine.
guys can sell the weight.
Then we have to.
We have to address it.
That's
So
fine.
how long do you propose? I mean, just so we can do the landmark sale, so,
Right, until it's finished.
yeah, 30 days.
Mike,
Well,
Just a-
I was gonna say 6.
Sorry. Just another question, does selling a cash flow stream count as selling real property?
This is the problem I'm trying to describe.
It's kind of pseudo.
According to the
It's kind of all.
According to the document, we're transferring the leases and only retaining limited rights. So our interest on the leases are real property interests. So stake the land.
so is there a motion to approve this, subject to a 30-day sunset provision being added?
Are we sure that everything will be done?
Well, we'll do it first, I'm hoping we'll do first and second meeting so we can
Move to waive the first reading.
Okay.
Sure, things can be taken care of in 30 days.
do it in the next one. If you want to have more debate, or you can do it in 60, give yourself more time.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to waive first reading. Is there a second? I heard a second. Now discussion. We're talking over each other a little bit here.
I just want to make sure that we have sufficient time to do whatever we want to do. If we want, we can talk about it. Yeah, I think 60 days is more realistic, because I would also, if we're going to decide, I would like everybody here for this discussion as well.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor and a second to waive first reading. All in favor of waiving first reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? First reading is waived. Is there a motion for second reading and adoption with the provision of a 60-day sunset provision?
So moved.
Second.
And is that with the 3/4 vote?
Yeah, this is
That's
it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Haber?
Aye.
Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson? Trustee Chamberlain? Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein? That
Okay.
is ordinance 190915.
All right. Now we need to have first reading or waiving first reading of an ordinance approving the purchase and sale agreement with Landmark Dividend.
I think Mr. Clayton should do that.
Yeah, I'll move to waive first reading.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor of waiving first reading signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? First reading is waived. Is there a motion for adoption of an ordinance approving the purchase and sale sale agreement with Landmark Dividends?
I move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, roll call please.
Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Chamberlain?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein?
Nay.
Trustee Haber?
Aye.
And Trustee Jamerson. That is ordinance
Well, wait a minute, the mayor has to vote to be able with all seven present. Mayor votes aye. I don't get to vote that often, don't change me.
Let's see, so we have 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, we need 5.25.
Yeah.
It didn't
Yeah,
pass.
Jamerson did that.
No, 5.25.
There's five.
It didn't do it.
This is exactly.
This is why
It's 6.
there's 5 trustees, oh, that's right, Eric voted no, sorry, Eric, I'm not.
Stay consistent.
So it's 5-1, so see, now we
So
realize that
motion failed.
that's where it is.
It should be brought up again, though. can't it?
Only by somebody on the prevailing side.
Say that again.
Only by someone on the prevailing side.
Oh, so we have to impose upon,
Does anyone wish to change their vote from yes to no?
Just as a point of order, if we, or a question, if we modify the first ordinance to 2/3, according to the sunset, we can reconsider that? Would that then mean 5 votes would carry?
Yes.
I believe, at least I know from a parliamentary point, yes, you can amend what you just passed.
yeah, but this ordinance says that it passed by 3/4.
No, Mike, I'm talking about the ordinance that was just passed as to how to sell real estate.
Establishing procedures for the sale of.
No, I understand that, but then how do we get this second ordinance back before the board?
I don't know.
You can't get that second ordinance, it doesn't come back automatically.
Right.
Fixing the first ordinance doesn't bring this one back before.
Yeah.
Think about this for a minute. If it's the same meeting at the next meeting, it has to be somebody from the prevailing side.
You said that the prevailing side can do it. Can that individual, whoever from the prevailing side, ask for it to be heard again when we have a full board?
Yes, he is the only person who can move to have that ordinance heard again at the next meeting.
And still would have the opportunity to vote for or against it at
He
that.
doesn't have to vote for the motion that he made. Actually, he would have to vote yes on the motion to reconsider.
Correct, but
But
no.
it doesn't have to be yes in relation
Right,
to
it's the vote against the
the
ordinance.
item itself. That is correct.
Nice to have all this.
What about the missing trustee?
What was that?
What about the missing trustee? Does he have any rights?
No.
No. So, Eric, you are a powerful individual right now.
I'm remaining consistent.
Would you want to, okay, we'll have to deal with this as we go along now. Old business, an ordinance restating Chapter 7 of Title 8 of the Riverwoods Village Code to adopt new versions of building, residential, mechanical, fuel, gas, plumbing, fire protection, electric, energy conservation, accessibility, and property maintenance codes. We've had a first reading on this. I can represent to you that Trustee Jamerson, who had some questions, has indicated to me that he's fine with going forward on this now. He does not have any objections.
So moved.
Second.
Do we need a regular first reading, or is this sort of weird again?
So, this would be for second reading and adoption of an ordinance that says everything that I just said. Further discussion, hearing none.
You're voted.
Oh, there is, I'm sorry, I
I'm
apologize.
very vocal tonight. I pointed out both to Rob and to John that 50% of the ordinance deals with electrical exceptions to the standards. And I wasn't sure if that was because there was a personal interest in that or that they weren't adequate on the standards that we normally use. And it was done because we have someone who's an expert in it, which is fine. But I now question that since so much of the language was done because a single individual in the electrical field felt that our ordinances needed that, is there any reason to think that maybe a plumber might want to look at the plumbing ordinance or the construction or want to look at that ordinance? I mean, it just seemed very unusual that 50% of the ordinance was on one of the trades that needed all that extra work. None of the other ones did.
Rob, would you want to address that?
Well, you mentioned plumbing first. I mean, our plumbing inspector, I talked to him about this, and he's been through many code cycles of plumbing code books, and he is happy with the way the model code, in this case, the Illinois State Plumbing Code, has been. I think in general, codes are into a pretty high bar. But tend to see that in other villages too. For some reason, electrical gets the most work over.
All right.
Modified to local conditions, or just the preference of the local electrical inspector. But as far as the codes themselves, I think the bar is very high for all of them.
Except electrical.
I don't know if I'd say that. I just say there's more amendments to it. For the biggest one is probably a lot of villages try to phase out certain materials.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Rick took the time to do this, and in no way is this a slam against him. But it was a little jarring to see that that was the only one that was picked out to make exceptions to.
Well, some of this too, though, is remember, we're working off of the national codes, so it's not like it's just coming out of nowhere, but I understand your. Are there any other questions, comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein? Trustee Haber? Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson? That is ordinance 190916.
All right, let me step back a moment to the prior issue. Trustee Chamberlain asked a question about the absent member. I will double check, but now that I think about it, I believe the trustee who was not here might be able to raise a motion to reconsider. I will double check Robert's rules on that. So with that correction, I know of no reason to go into executive.
I think obviously is that we can introduce an ordinance at the next meeting, amending that ordinance. It'll just be the ordinance. So if that's what the board wants, I can just have an ordinance at the next meeting, amending the ordinance that requires three-quarters vote.
Well, I so I'm
I could just bring that ordinance, the differences of the way, 30 days until the next meeting, October 1, actually.
To the floor. Eric, ask your question to everybody.
Yes.
He said to be abstained.
Yeah, yes.
You have to bring the motion to the floor first, though.
Yes, Eric, the motion has to be made. Waiting for nothing. Nothing happens when you don't talk. Okay? Does that answer your question? Does it? Trustees never have to vote, and in a case like this, where there's a minimum number based on some individual thing, an abstention is virtually the same as a no vote. So, okay, I know of no reason to go to executive session. Yes. Oh, that's right, we have the executive session minutes. I don't know that we'll go into executive session. Let's hand them out and then we can decide if we need to or not. Okay, for those of you who are in the audience, all one of you, please bear with the board while they review these minutes.
So wait, I'm looking at Robert's rules.
Yes,
Just to go back to the other one.
that's fine.
So if a main, so you're right that only someone from the prevailing side.
That I know is correct out of those that you did.
Right, but the question can't be brought up again during the same session by someone moving to rescind the motion. To rescind may be moved by any member, but if notice of it was not given at the previous meeting, it requires a 2/3 vote.
motion to rescind needs to be noticed ahead of time.
But it can't, that is a way to get around this, though.
I'll take a look at that and see that that has to be next week.
So is it the same meeting? Does it say?
I'm not sure.
Can't be the same meeting because we have to give notice.
It says this can be done in the day the vote to be reconsidered is taken on the next succeeding day of the same session. If a main motion has been adopted or rejected or postponed indefinitely, and no one is both able and willing to move to reconsider the vote, the question can be brought up again during the same session, only by moving to rescind the motion. So it sounds like it's in the same session. To rescind may be moved by any member, but if the notice of it was not given in a previous meeting, I don't know if it is, a motion or a motion to rescind.
I believe it's a motion to rescind.
Well, how could you give notice of a motion to rescind if you didn't know you needed to do it?
That would be, that would be at the next meeting.
But
But
it says the
notice of it
same.
was not given in a previous meeting, it requires a 2/3 vote or a vote of a majority of the enrolled membership. At any future session, the resolution or other main motion may be rescinded the same way if it had been adopted, or it may be introduced anew if it had been rejected or postponed indefinitely, provided the question cannot be reached by calling up the motion to reconsider which had been made in the previous session. Oh my God.
Could be a lot of reasons. I agree, because that's,
And I'm a lawyer.
and I studied it, and because I know these issues come up, and I still agree with you.
Now, here's what our village code says. Reconsideration. After the decision of any question, any member who voted with the majority may move a reconsideration of any action at the same or next succeeding meeting. Provided, however, the resolution authorizing or relating to any contract may be reconsidered at any time before the final execution thereof. A motion to reconsider shall require the same number of votes as is required to adopt an ordinance. After a motion for reconsideration has been acted on, no other motion for reconsideration thereof shall be made without unanimous
So
consent.
that's specifically what overruled Roberts anyway, and that gives us the ability to do it, so.
Question is, do you want to do it tonight, or do you want to do it?
You still would need the same number of votes to.
No.
We have
No,
We could
it's
change
going
it
to
one.
reconsider
You're right.
the ordinance.
The original motion.
Just as a point in that conversation is, I think there's some risk that we will lose the transaction if we don't approve it tonight, because they want to bundle this in an upcoming financing. And if it's outside the scope of the timing of the financing, then we may lose the transaction.
It would be
Okay,
ordinance 190915,
which was the,
ordinance setting procedures for the sale of real estate.
so you would
So
first
I
have,
thought make a motion to reconsider. I don't know.
Yes, the thing is, after you
You know,
reconsider,
you can always make a motion to
Rescind.
change what you did. You're not changing that vote, you are now moving to amend that which was already passed.
I think that would be,
after the decision of any question, the question was whether to adopt that ordinance. Any member who voted with the majority may move a reconsideration of any action at the same or next succeeding meeting. So, I think someone here who voted for that ordinance can move to reconsider that ordinance.
In the interest of safety, although I don't necessarily agree, because you're not changing the motion that's passed, now you're changing the ordinance that's on the books.
I want to
to
So take a look at
Because
this.
Michael, this is kind of your thing, and so you voted with the majority, so why don't you make that motion?
As long as I understand exactly what I'm doing, which is I think I'm moving to reconsider the motion.
No, you would be making a motion to rescind the earlier vote adopting the ordinance that,
No, that's
I
not.
don't think so. I think it would be a motion to reconsider the vote on the adoption of ordinance 09.
will do it.
That requires 3/4, that requires 3/4.
Then we would.
Is that what you're talking about, or the ordinance?
The ordinance that set the guidelines for the sale of property.
from, which is now is and was 3/4.
We're just reconsidering the whole vote, and we're back like we never voted.
Okay.
Could I say this?
Yes.
Listen, I think that this should be approved. I was making it known that I wasn't voting for it.
Would you like to move to reconsider then?
I think the majority of the board wants it to happen, and me as a trustee, I think that it should happen.
Okay,
I wanted to make it known that I wasn't
understand that, Eric.
in favor of this.
We know that. I'm just asking you now, are you saying that you would be willing to vote yes just to get it done tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Would you move to reconsider the vote authorizing the lease?
Hold on.
It's to authorize an ordinance approving the purchase and sale agreement with Landmark Dividend.
So,
Is there a second?
second.
All those in favor of reconsidering the vote on the ordinance approving the purchase and sale agreement with Landmark Dividend, and do it by roll call, sorry. I believe, just to be safe,
Yeah.
let's do it by roll call.
Okay, trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Abstain.
trustee Haber,
That's the same as a no.
Oh,
And you think,
what do I do now?
This is an aye. Actually, this is a reconsider, you can abstain.
okay. Trustee Haber,
Or,
Yes, this is just to reconsider.
This is not an aye or a nay, it's an oi.
I understand.
It's
The-
not
The
a
chair
choice.
interprets an oi as a yes under these circumstances.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson, trustee Chamberlain.
aye.
All right. The motion to reconsider having passed, the board is now considering whether to adopt an ordinance approving the purchase and sale of an agreement with Landmark Dividend.
Mr. Clayton's gonna move there.
I move that.
Well, I don't think you have to move again. Do it again just to be safe.
Does this,
Move for approval.
is this,
I
is
move
this,
for approval.
Second.
does this still require 3/4?
Yes.
Yes, that hasn't changed.
What's the, I don't understand why it's
Go
not
ahead.
important, even with me.
This is 5.25.
That's right.
It's the numbers here of seven.
We need
So it's not three quarters of the people. Here it's three quarters.
Quarters of the total number of people. So in the interest of moving forward, what you're expressing, we appreciate it.
So roll call, right?
You want to start with me?
Trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson, trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye.
Now, with you.
You're making the same mathematical error I did.
So it's 1909.
Six written.
1909-17, thank you.
Without the mayor.
Yes.
We need six altogether, including
And there was six.
had to be six.
And may I
Yes.
ask that we, at our next meeting, reconsider or discuss the motion for this procedure?
Yes, rather than go through that tonight, which we could do, I agree, let's do that at the next meeting. And I would also like to say thank you to Eric for trying to move everything forward, even though the record should reflect that he did so.
That's not, the majority of
No, we understand.
trustees want this to happen, and I think it should happen in that case. I'm reasonable.
That's what I'm saying, we appreciate it, even though you did not actually believe in the overall transaction. We appreciate your spirit of cooperation. Now, can we go to those executive session minutes? Do we need to go into executive session to discuss them? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
So
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. I'm at the risk of running afoul again. I know there's no reason to go into executive session. Next meeting is October 1st. Do I have a motion to
Just a
consider?
quick question, John.
Oh, I should have.
With regard to making these public, when do we consider whether?
I was just going to say, we need to have a list of all of our minutes. These, obviously, we would not publish until we have everything signed. As long as there's a reason to remain confidential, it should remain so. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? We adjourn.